We are going now to the US to talk to Suzanne Forbes Vierling. She's, as I said, she's a psychologist, a writer, an educator, and choreographer, and she's going to tell us about how gender identity has appropriated the concept of intersectionality.
I'm going to talk about intersectionality, Black womanhood, and really what I consider a form of white supremacy on the left here in the United States with what we are experiencing with colonization and the erasure of womanhood. So I have spent my time, a lot of my time in higher education, in psychology, on, so inside of psychology, business, I was a chair of a business program, marriage, family therapy, counseling, all of that. And I've had many students graduate my programs. Part of my responsibility were my programs. I had students out in the real world doing internships in prisons, community centers, mental health facilities, locked units, locked hospital units, and things like that. So when it comes to intersectionality over on the law side of academia, I'm just going to give a quick definition of or understanding of intersectionality from the point of Kimberly Crenshaw, the woman who coined the phrase, and wrote summaries about what it means to be Black and woman. So, she stated that, being a Black woman, those two intersex, those two demographic variables are inextricably tied. There's no separating it. You come as a Black woman. It's very difficult to separate both of those things out. Both identities come together when dealing with cases of discrimination, which is what she is commenting on the legal side originally. There was a case with General Motors where Black women were not hired to work in the office with white women because they were Black, and not hired in manufacturing with Black men because they were women. So there's an old saying that a lot of us will say to each other in academia and amongst Black sovereign women and things like that: all the women are white, all the Blacks are men. That's been like a theme that Black women have had to deal with since post-slavery. For example, Black men and white women got the right to vote before Black women, First Nation women, Latina, Asian, things like that, here in the United States. So this is the premise of what she's talking about. But my whole experience has been in psychology, not with law. And we never had, well, I'll get to that. So what is intersectionality? This is a broad understanding. It is a deep awareness of how each person belongs to multiple communities simultaneously. It is to understand that some aspects of who you are is visible to the world and some are not. So if you're a brown-skinned, physically disabled, Native American woman, all of that is visible to the world. And then there are some aspects of who you are that's not visible to the world, and it could be hidden if you wanted it to be hidden. So if you are a lesbian and there's nothing sending a signal or sending a low piece of information, you could keep that to yourself. It is a part of you. It is who you are. No one's saying to deny who you are, but that is invisible until you make it visible. Intersectionality, along with marginality and centrality, allows you to understand your level of oppression or privilege in your community, in your world, in your space. It is to understand how your life is positioned and affected by multiple intersecting identities. Each space that all of us are in has a proximal relationship to power and oppression, and it's all on a continuum. So, for example, maybe a biracial Black woman is positioned in a little different spot than, say, a brown-skinned Black woman or a dark-skinned Black woman, for example. Now, power and privilege is another concept, that we all talked about. We live in this European dominant culture, European/European American values, laws, systems, infrastructure, and military, right? For now, that is who the dominant group and the dominant culture is right now. All European people, all white people, regardless of sex, gender expression, sexual orientation, are visible as members of the dominant group. All other people are decentered from the dominant group to varying degrees. So, okay. So Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, even though we did not even know about her. So I am dating myself. I'm talking about 1995, starting in 1995, dealing with these issues and having to go to the library and print articles, literally off of the shelf, no Google, no nothing. So we all had to go to primary source, and we all had to draw from a variety of disciplines to teach without any awareness of what was going on the legal side. Bell Hooks and Crenshaw's work dovetails very nicely with each other. Bell Hooks talks about the centrality, marginality continuum. How far away from the center are you? And the center is white, male, heteronormative, middle class. That's at the center. And we all vary around that center. And the more visible we are away from that, the more marginal we are on a continuum. It's very important to understand that, especially with dealing with everything that we're dealing with men in our spaces and taking away our rights. When you are from a less powerful, visible group, you cannot opt in to a privileged group. And when you are from a privileged power group, you can opt in to a subjugated group, and you don't need permission of the subjugated group to maneuver in their community, as we all know very well. And an individual can have a foot in a power position and a foot in a subjugated position. For example, white women and Black and brown men. There's a little foot in being white and got a little foot in there of being a man. And I know the women are on the call going, we don't have any power. What are you talking about? But, Okay, over on the psychology side, Black women academicians did not have Crenshaw's work. We were focused on behavioral health and helping our students and helping the clinical world to be better providers of treatment to Black and brown women, to women in general, to poor women. Some of the things that happen to poor women of all nationalities is just horrendous. And since, many of us, we were creative in communicating to our students. So we use terms like 3 strikes to talk about race, sex, and class. Black, female, poor. Brown, female, poor. White, female, poor. Or double trouble, being Black and female. We say double trouble. And so on to describe to our students. Okay, here is boy, this is like 2 semesters in one little slide. But I talked a little bit already about double trouble and 3 strikes. That is like the crux of intersectionality. And then we also have something called double bind. This is where Black women hesitate to call law enforcement, i.e., white patriarchy, white supremacy, on Black men. So double bind is a sacrificial position that Black women put themselves in, sacrifice of safety for Black men who are perceived to be completely crushed and oppressed by white supremacy. That's a double bind, that sacrificing, risking yourself inside your community in order to protect the men. Double patriarchy. We understand that we have a ruling patriarchy. We understand that we have, a system in place that's set up, but all women of color are also a part of their own culture's men, their own culture's patriarchy. And so so women of color straddle 2 layers of patriarchy and have to try and navigate and negotiate inside of both at the same time. Also, Black women are straddled between an androcentric Black culture, meaning male-centered, males are prioritized, and a woman's movement where we don't necessarily always move together and in sync with each other. So we've got that double straddle there. Intersectionality is really just a concept used to understand, clarify, and honor someone in their full self with no erasure, no minimizing of what someone can be experiencing based on a visible or invisible identity. Now, how did this happen in mental health? Believe me, no one just dragged these concepts out of the clear blue sky, and they are required coursework to complete in order to get, your degree and in order to get licensed. The profession was moving swiftly, and therapists had to become culturally competent immediately. This is in the 70s and 80s, and it progressed very quickly in the 90s when then Governor Ronald Reagan shut down mental institutions and people were just put out on the street. And so grant funding, federal funding, a whole bunch of money came down, and therapists had to adjust to this new business model. Community clinics were opening up all over the place, and therapists had to make that shift from doing analysis, where you go to therapy like 3-4 times a week, you got money, you pay cash, to a more medical model, insurance reimbursement, state and federal reimbursement. And white therapists were, people from communities, people of different cultures would come in once and never come back. And white therapists were like, oh my God, what's happening? So literally it was a business imperative for everyone to become culturally competent. Clients, patients, consumers were just not trusting white therapists. And everybody had to examine that. And people had to do their self-exploration and do all of that work. And we had to find ways to teach students, teach the next batch of therapists how to be, culturally competent so that, they can have a good trusting relationship so that they can help in the healing process. Okay, I'm going to talk about a case study. So I love action for my students. I always tell them, get your work done, get your hours in, do the best clinical work that you can, when you're out there. But also, if you see something, do something. So this is a little case study where therapists were at a clinic, and one young white woman got a Black woman into therapy, and she had about 3rd stage breast cancer. And she was receiving treatment, oral, some type of oral medication. And so the therapist was like, that's interesting. And then another Black woman came to her caseload, and another and another. So she stopped and said, let me look at the systems and let me, I got dragged through these classes learning about intersectionality and learning about systemic racism and classism. And here I am at a community clinic, poor women. They have 3rd stage breast cancer, and right around the corner is a hospital that looks like this. And people are getting MRIs and scans like this. And they're getting chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. But I work at a health clinic, multidisciplinary health clinic, where there's health, mental health, and other things. And women are getting oral medication. So instead of, I'm going to stay in the office and do my clinical work, and this is my job, this is my role, she stepped out of her role to make some phone calls, bring in the leadership of this health center, build some bridges with folk at this hospital, because she said women at this hospital are really getting treatment, and Black women here are getting almost palliative care. This is not right. So a few phone calls, she handed it off, continued to do her work, and the women here were routed here. So that's an action step. And that is what I'm accustomed to when it comes to taking theories and concepts and putting them into action. Otherwise, we're just talking, So so many of my students did things like this, I told them, look, don't burn buildings down and don't sacrifice your career. But, you can, do some things, get some things going. If you see a systemic issue, this situation could not just be blamed on, or not blamed, but assigned to an individual not working hard enough or something like that. It was a real systemic issue and a big gap that literally could cost people their lives. All right. Now, unfortunately, to me, I hear people using the term intersectionality in such a odd way. Over time, with all the knowledge that we have in terms of cultural competence, we have the same poor outcomes when people interact with various systems. What should have been a continued increased awareness of how better to serve people in a more humane way, as an aid in understanding how systems and individuals interact in order to improve, design effective programs, and so forth. Let's eradicate systemic unintentional abuses. We all hear about the intentional, but what about unintentional? A lot of things go through. If we had kept on the trajectory in mental health, in law, in social work, in social justice, in law enforcement, we could be in a better place. Now the term is just thrown out like a badge. My feminism is intersectional. What is that? You are not intersectional if you don't include men in your feminism. Okay. And here's one that comes specifically from the Black community towards Black women who speak up about sex-based issues. Hopefully some of my friends will chuckle at this one a little bit. Black women got that intersectionality from white feminists, those dangerous white feminists that destroyed the Black community. That's like a common common argument inside the Black community. And we always have to say, we have brains, we have, we've been fighting for a long time. It's not like we're just sitting there and we don't have any agency, okay? I don't know if anybody's heard that. Let's get right to it. Here is Rachel Dolezal and here's Caitlyn Jenner. I categorize them as European Americans. That is what's visible, first and foremost, symbol of power, both of them. But the narrative out there is she's transracial and Caitlyn is transgender, and somehow Rachel, the transracial, is the bad person and Caitlyn is the good person, or whoever is that person. And a reminder, when you are a visible member of the dominant culture, you have the power to jump in and out of subjugated spaces as you wish. So it's performative, most definitely. Okay. Caitlyn Jenner was in a golf tournament and then now is running for governor saying that male-bodied people should not be in women's sports. Well, could kind of do what you want to do, right? That's power and privilege. That is the ability to be able to do all of those things. But both of these people, more so Caitlyn, have erased the fact that they are of European heritage and diminish it and try not to talk about it as much as possible and just use the labels transracial, transgender. Rachel Dolezal also sued Howard University for racial discrimination. So she was able to jump out, rock out a lawsuit, and then jump back into being a light-skinned, almost white-passing Black woman. Okay, and men will never give up their power. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're from a weak patriarchy, a not so smart patriarchy, a ruling patriarchy. I don't care what color they are. Men will never give up their power. They will never abdicate. And I think that that's what we feel. We know, that won't happen. So it doesn't, you put on dress, I don't care. Men will never give up their power. They can articulate that that's what they're doing, but they will never do it. It's their life source. So my experiment was that I said, I identify as a white male, and I expect everyone to address me as such. And I expect my $5 million line of unsecured credit. And that's that. And I want to see a piece of paper that says that my FICO is 800. Okay, perfect. Chop, chop. Do it right now. And obviously it didn't work out for me. But just to be able to articulate a demand to opt into a space where my visibility would not allow it, So, we've had discussions around my experiment, my students and my colleagues, just for a little humor, but it feels kind of good. I grew up where I live, a British man came to my neighborhood, not my neighborhood, but came to my county in one of the wealthiest enclaves. And he just walked in, he had a British accent. He walked in, got $1 million house, rent-free, got both of his kids in school, top school, $20,000 a year tuition, country club, everything, and went for like a year without paying anything. He just literally walked in like he was an American Express card, and they took his skin color and his British accent. And, obviously he was a shyster, but he got away with it for like a whole good year, just for doing that. All right. How men unintersectionalize themselves by erasing their race. I noticed that many of these men do not get called out for doing this. And I think that they should be called out. They take all the speaking points from Black culture and the civil rights movement. I've heard men say things like, oh my gosh, it's like being at the lunch counter. It's like, for those of you outside the United States, you know, African-American people used to protest in civil rights movement by doing sit-ins inside of white delis and small restaurants and little breakfast spots that only whites could go to. And, you know, then they'd be, you know, pushed around and all of that for being there. And that was the lunch counter. We've all seen videos and they're not fun. So they'd say, oh my gosh, it's like being at the lunch counter. Or, oh my gosh, it's like Rosa Parks. Oh my gosh, it's like a lynching. And you're like, a lynching? Oh my goodness. They talk about the murder rates of Black transgender individuals over and over and over and over, even though I haven't seen any crime reports, and I know a lot of my sisters share data. I haven't seen anything where white transgender individuals experience the kind of crime the way that they talk about. They weaponize Black trauma, so they have no problems bringing up the most horrific things in meetings, just casually. They just feel entitled to do it, and then they say Black over and over to the point that you forget that the person who's speaking is white and natal male, who is the actual demographic who harmed Black people to create the trauma that the white male claims to be experiencing. Gaslighting times 100. They adopt the language of oppression or the language of how women speak about our subjugation or about racial justice and civil rights. They never, ever, ever talk about being white. It's actively avoided. And they have the power to punish anyone who's gotten out of line, and everybody knows it. So nobody walks in a room and thinks, oh, this is a woman. Nobody does that. Everybody's like, hi, Jennifer. But everybody's like, that's a white guy. And he could do some damage to you. Men have conquered men for thousands of years, and all conquerors understand the importance of eradicating language, identity, and freedom of movement. It's very clear. It's a long-standing pattern, and we are in it right now. Once colonized, man has access to all the populations at his whim, and he does what he wants. So I was asked, hey, what are some ways to respond to gaslighting, emotional abuse, the narcissism? Well, really, one of the solutions really is break up with that person, get rid of that person, get away from that person. But we can't do that. Okay, thank you. I think this might be the very end. I think that they need to be reminded that they are privileged men, natal white men. I know people are tired of the word privilege, but it really does have meaning in this, that they're not subjugated. You're not subjugated. You actually don't have a high murder rate. You actually are not oppressed. And the only demographic that can subjugate you in any way is another natal white man. That's pretty much the only person that has any power over you, is someone that looks like you. Remind them that they are gaslighting when they align themselves with African-American social justice, racial justice issues. They are the demographic that created a lot of the things that we're dealing with. It's unfortunate, but I think that helps to push back. Remind them that they are gaslighting when they align themselves with women's issues, when they created the unsafe conditions for women around the world, and have yet to really do something about femicide, equal pay, and all of that. In fact, it's just all of the exploitation is just getting notched up. Remind them that they are chromosomal XY, and that a declaration of a feeling is nothing. It means nothing. Many serial killers have verbally declared themselves to be nice guys, and we have paid the price for that. Remind them that predatory behaviors exist in the mind and the intention, not the appendage. So even post-op, because they were trying to weasel in on that, even post-op, rape and the pleasure that some men experience when they know they have discomforted the woman is based on the thoughts, not the appendage. Thank you, everyone.